There's a widespread belief that life responds to intensity, that if you want something strongly enough, pursue it long enough, or work toward it consistently enough, reality will eventually comply. This belief is not irrational. It is reinforced by many early experiences. Effort produces results. Persistence leads to progress. Action creates change. For a long time, this logic holds. But there comes a stage where it stops working. Not gradually, not ambiguously. Effort continues, yet response disappears. You keep moving. You keep applying pressure. You keep doing what once worked, and nothing answers. This is usually interpreted as resistance. Life is blocking you. Circumstances are delaying you. Timing is unfavorable. So effort increases. More thinking, more planning, more pushing. But the gap between action and response only widens. This is not because destiny has become indifferent. It is because effort is no longer the variable that matters. Carl Jung observed that at certain thresholds of psychological development, the relationship between effort and outcome changes completely. External life stops responding to conscious striving and begins responding to inner condition. Until that condition forms, movement stalls. This is not punishment. It is not failure. It is not delay. It is a structural shift. Earlier in life, effort aligns with development. The psyche is building capacity, strengthening identity, testing direction. Action is necessary. But when inner contradictions accumulate, effort loses its effectiveness. You may still be capable, still disciplined, still committed, but something inside is divided. Division disperses energy. When energy disperses, effort loses coherence. This is why pushing feels heavier during this phase. Not because you are weak, because effort is no longer supported internally. Most people misread this moment. They assume they're not trying hard enough, or that they need a new strategy, a better mindset, a clearer goal. But strategy does not resolve division. Only integration does. Carl Jung emphasized that destiny does not respond to conscious will alone. It responds to the state of the whole psyche. When conscious intention conflicts with unconscious orientation, life resists, not as opposition, but as non-cooperation. Non-cooperation feels like silence. Nothing opens. Nothing advances. Nothing collapses either. You are simply held in place. This holding is uncomfortable, because effort without response feels meaningless. Meaninglessness triggers anxiety. The mind looks for explanation. Am I missing something? Am I doing it wrong? Is this the wrong path? These questions intensify effort. But effort cannot resolve what effort created. The core issue is not direction. It is alignment. Earlier, you could act while divided. Results still came. At this stage, you cannot. The psyche no longer allows movement without coherence. This is why destiny does not respond to effort alone. Effort without alignment fragments energy. Fragmented energy produces noise. Noise produces resistance, not external resistance, internal resistance. That resistance manifests as stalled outcomes. In daily life, this phase often feels strangely quiet. You may notice fewer opportunities appearing, less external feedback, less confirmation, not negative feedback. Absence. This absence is unsettling, but it is intentional. Jung described this as a withdrawal projection. When the psyche needs to reorganize internally, it removes external reinforcement, so attention turns inward. Without reinforcement, effort loses motivation. This loss is often misinterpreted as fatigue or burnout, but burnout implies depletion. Here, energy is present. It is simply no longer available for outward striving. The psyche is conserving. Conservation precedes reorganization. This is observable across many real-life contexts. In career development research, individuals often report periods of professional stagnation immediately before major role changes or breakthroughs. During these periods, effort increases but advancement halts. Retrospectively, these phases coincide with shifts in identity, values, or internal authority. The external pause mirrors internal adjustment. The same pattern appears in relationships. People may try harder to connect, communicate more, explain more, and feel less met. The problem is not communication. It is inner conflict. When you are uncertain internally, effort amplifies that uncertainty. Others feel it. Life reflects it. Carl Jung believed that fate is not an external force that rewards effort. Fate is the expression of inner necessity. When inner necessity is unclear, outer life hesitates. Hesitation feels like waiting. Waiting without impatience is rare, but it appears here. You may notice that although nothing is moving, you are not panicking. Earlier, stagnation created urgency. Now it creates stillness. This is significant. Stillness without fear indicates a new psychological condition forming. You're no longer forcing movement, but you are also not giving up. You are suspended. Suspension is not an activity. It is readiness without direction. This readiness cannot be manufactured. It emerges when inner contradictions soften. Contradictions often accumulate unnoticed. You want one thing, but live another. You value something, but act against it. You pursue outcomes that no longer match who you are becoming. Effort keeps these contradictions hidden because action distracts. When effort stops working, contradictions surface. This surfacing is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Jung emphasized that unconscious material must be integrated before destiny can respond. Without integration, fate repeats. With integration, fate reorganizes. Reorganization does not begin externally. It begins internally. This is why nothing happens first. Nothing moves. Nothing changes. Nothing responds. The psyche is creating the condition that makes response possible. This condition does not look impressive. It does not feel powerful. It feels quiet, neutral, unforced. You may notice that you stop insisting on outcomes, not because you no longer care, because insistence feels inappropriate. This is a key marker. When insistence fades, alignment approaches. Alignment does not require effort. It requires coherence. Coherence forms when inner conflict resolves enough that action no longer pulls in opposing directions. At that point, effort becomes unnecessary. Not because you stop acting, because action and direction coincide. But before that happens, effort must fail. This failure is functional. It prevents premature movement. It blocks outcomes that would reinforce fragmentation. Destiny does not respond to effort because effort alone cannot resolve inner division. It responds when division settles. This settling feels like waiting without urgency, like standing still without fear, like resting without stagnation. Nothing has arrived yet, but something has changed. You are no longer trying to make life respond. And that shift is not accidental. It is the first sign that the inner condition destiny requires is beginning to form. When effort loses its influence, the psyche does not move immediately into clarity. It moves into preparation. This preparation is not deliberate. It is not chosen, and it cannot be accelerated. Carl Jung described this phase as the formation of an inner condition, a state in which unconscious material has reorganized enough that outer life can respond without distortion. Until that condition stabilizes, nothing answers, not because life withholds, but because response would be premature. The psyche does not respond to intention alone. It responds to readiness. Readiness is not motivation. It is not desire. It is not certainty. It is internal agreement. Earlier, parts of you wanted different things, even if you were unaware of it. One part pushed forward. Another hesitated. One pursued growth. Another protected familiarity. These contradictions did not stop action. They only weakened coherence. Action still happened, but outcomes felt unstable, short-lived, or incomplete. Now, the psyche is no longer allowing that instability. It withdraws response until contradiction settles. This settling does not feel active. It feels quiet. You may notice that inner arguments soften, not because they are resolved conceptually, but because they lose charge. Questions that once dominated your thinking no longer demand answers. Concerns that once felt urgent now feel neutral. This neutrality is often misread as indifference. It is not. It is convergence. Carl Jung emphasized that before a major shift in life direction, psychic opposites must lose their polarity. As long as inner forces pull in opposing directions, Destiny cannot respond without amplifying conflict. Life waits. This waiting is not external. It is internal. In daily life, this condition often feels like emotional simplification. You care, but you do not cling. You think, but you do not ruminate. You plan, but you do not insist. This change is subtle but decisive. Research in cognitive psychology shows that when internal conflict decreases, decision-making networks quiet. The brain reduces repetitive evaluation loops, even before new goals emerge. The psyche is clearing space. Space is required for reorganization. Another hallmark of this phase is the reduction of urgency. Earlier, urgency drove movement. It kept you active. It prevented stillness. Now urgency fades, not replaced by passivity, replaced by tolerance. You can wait. You can pause. You can remain undecided without distress. This tolerance is critical. Destiny does not respond to desperation. It responds to containment. Containment allows timing. Carl Jung often described fate as synchronistic rather than linear. Synchronistic events require internal readiness. Without readiness, opportunities either do not appear or cannot be recognized. Recognition depends on alignment. Alignment forms quietly. You may notice that you are less attached to outcomes, not because you no longer want them, but because wanting no longer defines you. Desire has loosened its grip. This loosening is not resignation. It is decoupling. The psyche is separating identity from outcome. As long as identity depends on result, destiny cannot move freely. Movement would threaten stability. So life waits. This pattern is well documented in life transition research. Individuals often experience periods of low ambition and emotional neutrality before significant external changes. These phases correlate with internal value realignment rather than external obstacles. The pause is functional. Another important element of this inner condition is the withdrawal of self-justification. Earlier, you may have needed reasons, explanations, narratives to support your choices. Now justification fades. You do not need to explain why you are waiting or why you are not pushing. You simply are. This is a sign that authority has shifted inward. Carl Jung believed that when the ego relinquishes control, the self begins to regulate direction. This regulation is not verbal. It is experiential. You feel when something is ready. You feel when it is not. This sensing replaces forcing. The psyche trusts sensing more than strategy. Strategy belongs to the conscious mind. Sensing belongs to the integrated psyche. During this phase, sensing sharpens. You may notice that certain paths feel closed without explanation. Others feel open but undefined. You do not rush to label them. You allow the feeling to exist. Allowing is not passivity. It is precision. Precision requires restraint. Another marker of readiness is the disappearance of internal pressure. Earlier, pressure drove action. It created tension that demanded release. Now, pressure dissolves. Energy remains, but it is not pressing outward. It is held. Held energy feels dense. This density is often experienced as stillness with weight, not emptiness, not stagnation. Weight indicates consolidation. Consolidation must occur before redirection. Carl Jung described this as psychic energy returning to its center. When energy is no longer scattered across conflicting aims, it gathers. Gathered energy does not immediately move. It stabilizes. This stabilization is the inner condition destiny requires. Without it, any external change would be unstable. This is why the phase can feel strangely complete even though nothing has happened. You are not restless. You are not anxious. You are simply present. Presence without urgency is rare. It signals readiness. Destiny responds to presence, not pursuit. Presence allows response to arrive without distortion. Another aspect of this phase is a reduction of fear around uncertainty. Earlier, not knowing created anxiety. It demanded resolution. Now, not knowing feels tolerable. You do not need guarantees. This tolerance is essential. Opportunities often arrive without clear instruction. They require responsiveness, not certainty. Only a psyche comfortable with uncertainty can meet them. Carl Jung emphasized that individuation requires a capacity to hold the unknown. Those who rush to certainty remain bound to repetition. This phase trains tolerance. Without effort, without discipline, through stillness, nothing is being tested. Nothing is being proven. The psyche is completing a configuration. When this configuration settles, response becomes possible, not because life suddenly notices you, but because there is no longer internal resistance to response. Life responds when the psyche is no longer divided. This division has not fully resolved yet, but it is settling. You can feel it. The need to push has faded. The need to demand has softened. The need to control has loosened. What remains is availability. Availability is not expectation. It is openness without insistence. This is the inner condition that precedes external change. Not desire, not effort, not belief. Alignment. Alignment does not announce itself. It stabilizes quietly. And when it stabilizes enough, destiny does not need to be chased. It responds on its own terms. But before that happens, this phase must complete. The psyche must finish settling. Nothing else is required. Nothing else will help. And once this condition is formed, response is no longer optional. It is inevitable. But not yet. First, this quiet alignment must finish becoming real. When the inner condition completes, life does not respond with force. It responds with movement. This movement is quiet, incremental, almost unremarkable at first. There is no dramatic opening, no clear signal that destiny has arrived. Things simply begin to shift. What changes first is not opportunity. It is timing. Situations that once stalled now move forward without resistance. Conversations resolve without effort. Decisions that felt suspended now complete themselves. Carl Jung described this as the psyche no longer obstructing fate. When inner conflict settles, outer events no longer need to compensate for it. Life is free to proceed. Proceeding does not feel euphoric. It feels appropriate. Appropriateness is the key marker. You do not feel rushed. You do not feel pulled. You respond because response fits the moment. Earlier, action required motivation. Now, action requires relevance. This distinction matters. Motivation pushes. Relevance invites. Life begins to invite rather than resist. In daily experience, this often appears as small confirmations, an unexpected message, a delayed decision resolving itself, an opportunity emerging that does not demand sacrifice of integrity. Nothing feels extracted from you. You are not required to abandon yourself to move forward. This is new. Earlier, progress often required compromise. You pushed through discomfort. You ignored signals. You accepted misalignment as necessary. Now, misalignment halts movement again. But this time, it feels protective rather than frustrating. You no longer interpret resistance as failure. You recognize it as information. This recognition is only possible because inner alignment has stabilized. Carl Jung believed that when the psyche reaches coherence, fate expresses itself through synchronicity rather than struggle. Events line up not because they are engineered, but because nothing inside is working against them. This is why movement feels lighter, not faster, lighter. You are no longer dragging unresolved material into action. The psyche has finished integrating what needed integration. That work does not announce itself. It reveals itself through simplicity. You notice that choices no longer fragment you. You choose and move on. There is no lingering doubt, no internal argument replaying afterward. Decision science research supports this shift. When internal value systems align, post-decision regret decreases significantly, even when outcomes are uncertain. Alignment reduces friction after action. This creates momentum, not forced momentum, sustained momentum. Life begins to unfold in sequence rather than in bursts. Earlier, progress came in spikes, followed by collapse, then renewed effort. Now, progress feels continuous, not exciting, reliable. This reliability is often mistaken for lack of ambition, but ambition has not disappeared. It has reorganized. Carl Jung emphasized that true direction emerges when desire aligns with necessity. When this alignment occurs, Effort becomes proportional to reality rather than driven by fantasy. You no longer pursue outcomes that require distortion. This changes what appears in your life. Opportunities that once attracted you may no longer register. They feel irrelevant. Others appear that fit without negotiation. You do not need to convince yourself. You recognize fit immediately. This recognition is not intellectual. It is bodily. You feel steadier rather than activated. In practical terms, this may show up as fewer but more decisive choices. Less exploration, more commitment. Not commitment driven by certainty. Commitment driven by coherence. This distinction prevents burnout. Burnout occurs when effort contradicts inner orientation. Alignment eliminates that contradiction. Studies in occupational psychology show that individuals who act from internal coherence report higher endurance and lower emotional exhaustion. Even in demanding environments, endurance replaces urgency. You can stay with things longer without strain. Another sign of this phase is the disappearance of waiting. Not waiting externally, waiting internally. Earlier, you were waiting for permission, for confirmation, for clarity. Now waiting ends, not because answers arrived, because the need for answers dissolved. You move when movement is required. You pause when pause is required. This responsiveness is immediate. Carl Jung described this as the ego trusting the self. When trust forms, life no longer needs to be controlled. It is engaged. Engagement feels calm. You are involved without being consumed, committed without being driven. This is why life begins to reorganize. Not because destiny rewards alignment, but because alignment removes obstruction. What once blocked response was internal conflict. That conflict is settled. External life mirrors this settlement. You may notice that problems resolve with fewer steps, that misunderstandings clarify without intervention, that paths open where nothing existed before. These changes are not miraculous. They are structural. Structure has shifted. You are no longer divided. So life no longer needs to reflect division. Carl Jung believed that fate expresses inner reality over time. When inner reality stabilizes, fate stabilizes with it. This does not mean life becomes predictable. It becomes navigable. You can move through uncertainty without losing balance. Balance allows adaptation. Adaptation keeps life moving. This is the final stage of the sequence. Effort failed. Stillness formed. Alignment stabilized. Response followed. Not in reverse. Not out of order. Life could not respond before the inner condition existed. Now that it does, response is inevitable, not dramatic, not immediate, but steady. You are no longer trying to make something happen. Things happen because nothing inside resists them. This is what it means for destiny to respond, not as reward, not as fulfillment of desire, as correspondence. Inner coherence has reached a point where outer life can finally move without distortion. And once that threshold is crossed, life does not pause again for the same reason. Future pauses may come, but they will not feel like failure. You will recognize them, because you now know the sequence. Effort ends. Alignment forms. Response follows. Quietly, naturally, without force. That is how life reorganizes once the inner condition stabilizes, not by chasing destiny, but by no longer standing in its way. Nothing announced that this phase was complete. There was no external signal, no confirmation, no reward for endurance. What changed was internal. Effort had already ended. Urgency had already softened. Alignment had already formed. Life did not respond to wanting. It responded to coherence. Carl Jung understood this as the psyche reaching a point where inner conflict no longer interferes with fate. When the inner world stops pulling in opposing directions, outer life no longer needs to hesitate. Response does not arrive as fulfillment. It arrives as flow. Things begin to move because nothing inside resists movement. Timing improves. Decisions settle. Paths open without negotiation. This is not destiny intervening. It is destiny no longer being blocked. Nothing magical occurred. Nothing was summoned. A condition completed. And once that condition existed, response was inevitable. Not dramatic, not immediate, but unmistakably real. Life moves when you're no longer divided, and from that moment on, movement no longer needs to be forced.